Hello students, let us resume our discussion on I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. In my last discussion, I have suggested that what Martin Luther King actually pointed regarding the dreams of this particular person regarding the discrimination and segregation and different kind of separatism that had been pointed by him. Now let us resume this particular reading of the text. Here, Martin Luther King writes, now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. He says, therefore, ultimately you can find that the quicksands of racial injustice, it is actually pointing towards a kind of, decadence, a decadence that is perceptible throughout America at this moment, and also at the time when Martin Luther King Jr. actually focused on this particular kind of description. He writes, now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. As I've already mentioned in my last lecture, that whenever we read this particular text, that is I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King, it is not simply a kind of an address, rather it is a wonderful piece of literature. You can find here the two antithetical terms have been used by this person. The first one is quicksand and second one is solid rock. So ultimately you can find that the existence, it's foot stable, you see the stability, and also the existence has been pointed out by him. So it is a time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice. So ultimately you can find it's a metaphoric orientation where racial injustice has to be pointed in terms of the quicksands, and then you will find that when the brotherhood has to be conceptualized in terms of the solid rock. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all the God's children. Now, again, when the term like God's children is being incorporated, you can find that it is actually happening to be indicating towards a kind of equality. We are all God's children, irrespective of the class, irrespective of gender, irrespective of any kind of discriminatory perspective, irrespective of the racial perspectives altogether. So he says, therefore, now is the time to make justice. Injustice is prevailing here, and justice a reality for all the God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment, right? So ultimately, if you just measure your life in terms of the present scenario, then ultimately you cannot foresee your future. Now, the urgency that Martin Luther King had pointed here, it is actually indicating to the present scenario. That means when he is actually delivering his speech. Now, he says that it would be fatal for the nation, not the human being in general, not the particular race in general, but rather the nation. Okay, so it would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negroes' legitimate discontent. So the terms, just point out the terms. Negroes' legitimate discontent. Okay, discontent, it actually indicates a kind of dissatisfaction. And when it says Negroes, then you can find that it is actually indicating towards the epidermalization. Again, I have already mentioned the particular term, that is discrimination on the basis of epidermis, that is the color of epidermis, that is the color oriented politicization. So here it says the sweltering summer of the Negroes, legitimate, they are legitimately, they are fighting for justice, and the discontent, that is dissatisfaction, will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. So fundamentally, you will find that again, from the perspective of literary angle, you will find that the seasons have been incorporated. Why the season? Because you will find that the season actually indicates that there must be an end. Okay, it is not the whole year that have been pointed out. At one point, there is the sweltering summer that actually indicates the discontentedness, indicates towards the different kinds of tortures and cruelty that have been associated. you will find the same thing in dry September, that is in your syllabus obviously. At another point you will find that invigorating autumn. Okay, that means nature with its opulence, nature with its beauty, nature with its splendor. Okay, the term like invigorating, the term like that is breathing, you see, oxygen. So these are actually being incorporated with its full bloom, blossoms, beauty and color. Everywhere you will find that where there is freedom, there is equality, there is invigoration. Where there is inequality, where there is torture, where there is subjugation, where there is exploitation, you will find the sweltering summer. So everywhere that particular thing has to be incorporated. So that's why he says, this sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963, the very year, is not an end but a beginning, you see. So it is not a particular kind of an end being indicated, rather it's a kind of a beginning, the beginning towards a new era. Those who hope that Negro needed to blow up steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. So ultimately, there is a particular kind of an indication towards the patterning of injustice to be continued in future altogether. And ultimately, you will find that Martin Luther King is very much aware of the particular fact that the persons who hope that the Negro needed to blow up steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America. So the two terms that is being indicated here, one is the rest. Why it is not needed at the present moment? Because the injustice is being prevailing throughout America. And there is nothing to be associated with the term like tranquility. Why? Because tranquility, this particular term, is being associated with some kind of serenity, some kind of calmness, okay? And he says that that is not the time to be tranquil. That is not the time to take rest. Rather, it is the time for upheavals. It is the time to attack and it is the time to protest. So there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. So everywhere, as I've already mentioned in my previous lectures, regarding the fundamental basics that is being lacking in terms of the Negroes. So here it says that there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. So it is the basics right, it is the fundamental right that is completely being lacking in terms of the Negroes, in terms of the blacks. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. As it's an address, as I've already mentioned, that as it is an address, it must have to be associated with something that can create the spark among the people in general. It says, therefore, the whirlwinds of revolt, and the revolt is the basis of a movement. It will continue to shake the foundations of our nation. Okay, the revolt is necessary. It must shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. So what is the thing that he is trying to propagate here? He says that in spite of all our arguments, we can identify, we can see, we can look at something that have to be related with injustice that is prevailing. I have a dream, and that particular dream is coming later. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. It actually happens, you know. You know that ultimately, when we try to gather our rightful place, when we try to strive after justice, in getting justice properly, sometimes we unconsciously commit some wrongs. So Martin Luther King is very much aware of this particular fact. He says, therefore, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Again, the antithetical terms have been incorporated. Rightful place, wrongful deeds, so must not be done by us. We have to be well aware of our capabilities. We have to be well aware about our future. We have to be well aware about our controlling deeds, you see. He says, therefore, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. That is the fundamental thing that I should discuss on. You see that in every perspective, in every sphere, where there prevails inequality, where there prevails exploitation, subjugation, control, authority, dominance, everywhere you will find there is a particular chance of, upside down and downside up. What I'm trying to indicate here, that when a group of people suffer from injustice, they request, they protest, they do something by force. But while doing or while getting something by force, it may indicate towards bitterness, it may indicate towards hatred. So ultimately, it is not, the violence cannot be considered to be the actual way following which one can gather justice. Okay? Because, the situations can be turned down. And Martin Luther King is very much aware of this particular fact. He indicates, let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking, again, a metaphoric way of representation, thirst and drink and like that. You know that the same thing actually happened in French Revolution. Liberty, equality and fraternity was their optimum focus, or was their motto. But ultimately what happens, that in the name of the revolution, that it might be possible that it would end in a bloodless way. But ultimately what happened, a group of personages, they actually used it as a situation, okay? And, they used it in a wrong way. So Martin Luther King Jr., he is very much aware of this malpractice. And he is actually warning or giving warning to his people so that their movement, their striving may not be used by others in a wrong way, that have been indicated in this line. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. He continues again, we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. These are the two D's that he is mentioning, dignity and discipline. It is not the indisciplined way that they could achieve success, proper success. So therefore he says, we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. That is the thing that I am trying to indicate here. So the creative protest and physical violence, these are two different, segments. So the creative protest must not be degenerated into physical violence, because any form of violence cannot provide you the optimum level of your quest. So we must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force and soul force. The soul of physics, the force of physics, and the force of soul, obviously. So again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with the soul force. The soul is obviously indicated here. It is not simply the force, the power of physics that have been indicated here. Rather, the mind, the spirit, okay, the soul, that is also being indicated, that is being incorporated, and that is important, obviously. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of the white people. For many of our white brothers, mark the term white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, because this particular, the crowding, okay, as if like a congregation that is going on, as you can see, there also there are a number of people who are whites. So what it indicates, that if a particular kind of a, you know, self-imposed war begins, the continuous form of tussle between white versus black, the generalization, it cannot come to any positive solution. He therefore says that, a marvelous new militancy that is being incorporated with the temperament of the blacks at this moment, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people, because we cannot say that, because we can find here our comrades, okay, some of our comrades, few of our comrades, they are coming from the white group. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. So it is quite common, because the fundamental focus is not being wasted on the discrimination alone. Rather, you will find that the primary focus, the primary target of this particular gathering, this particular speech, is against exploitation, not against white versus black. Rather, any kind of exploitation, any kind of separatism, any kind of dominance, any kind of torture and cruelty. So, white versus black is obviously the primary focus of this particular text, but it is not at all everything. Rather, with this particular discrimination, the focus of this particular text is aiming at discrimination at various levels, whether on the basis of, skin color, whether on the basis of gender, whether basis of on the basis of caste, class, milieu, culture, provincial politics, everything, religion. So that is the fundamental thing, destiny, the future. It is being completely incorporated. It is being mixed. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. Our freedom, their freedom. So freedom is the ultimatum. It is not their freedom, our freedom, but ultimately we have to be free. Free from the clutch, free from the bondage, free from any kind of exploitation. That's all. They have come to realize this particular form. Where there is an autocrat, where there is a Hitler, you will find that the primary focus is not, Jews and others, Christians. Rather, it is an autocrat, it is the dictator, and obviously the person who is being subjugated. So Auschwitz, not simply an Auschwitz. Rather, it is everywhere. You see, a dictator, Hitler, is not simply a Hitler. Rather, it's every man. So ultimately, the primary focus, our thinking, a primary focus of our thought, our, of our argument, of our, say, any kind of discussion should be aimed at making an end to this subjugation, to this exploitation, not anything particular. He says, therefore, they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. You see? So this particular pledge is very important here. As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. So that is the fundamental basics of a particular movement. You cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality that is fundamentally, present within this particular country. The brutal aspects of police, the police itself has to be treated here, is being pointed out by Martin Luther King as a particular tool of exploitation that have been used by the politicians, by the thinkers, by the think tank, obviously. And in the present scenario, you see that in the present condition, in the 21st century, what is happening to America at this moment? You will find that the same thing, the horrors of police brutality, is being indicated again, and ultimately it actually creates the spark to create the conflagration that is being possibly present in the present day America at this moment. The white versus black crisis, the white versus black problem that is being pointed out here. So he says, therefore, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. And then he says, we can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. So you can find that these are the lines that are actually indicating towards the different kinds of exploitation that they're facing. He says that when we are in travel, when we are completely fatigued, we cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. That is actually happening. You have Vimayana, and the same kind of differentiation, same kind of separatist violence, the different kinds of tortures and treatments that have been made by the upper castes to the Dalits in the present day India. The same problem is occurring. You see, Bhimrao Ambedkar and his life has been pointed out by Durgabhai Syam there. So you can identify them, the similarities, similarities in terms of the differentiations, the similarities in terms of the exploitations. Everywhere it is being similar. He says, therefore, we can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels on the highways and the hotels in the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, quote unquote, for whites only. So that is actually happening, you see. These are the places to be made for the whites only. What does it mean? Does it simply indicating that you are making this particular place for a particular caste, for a particular gender, for a particular race? It is the separatism. It is the typical separatist violence that Martin Luther King is pointing out. So we can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity. There is nothing to be associated with the selfhood. There is nothing to be associated with the dignity. It is a typical human existence that is being pointed out, and that have been completely being negated by those personalities. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believe he has nothing for which to vote. Voting right, it's a very important and indicated thing. And here he says that in Mississippi, a Negro cannot vote, and in New York, a Negro cannot believe that for which to vote. There is no particular person who is standing, who is our representative, to whom it has to vote. The similar kind of question that have been, in the present Bollywood films, there is a particular film, very important film, that is Newton. I don't know whether you have seen it or not. You must take a look. There is a particular question to whom we should vote. The person who is actually standing there, is he one of our own to whom we can, who can feel our problem, who can feel our crisis and send our voices, our words to the higher authority? So that is the fundamental question he says here. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. So there is nothing actually. No, we are not satisfied. and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So justice and righteousness, these are the two ideas, these are the two things, two realities that we are striving after. Until they're coming, they are shade on us, rolling down us, we cannot be satisfied. Okay? And what else that he says, we will discuss it in our next lecture. Thank you.